Hello, everyone, and welcome to Consciousness for the Next Generation webinar series. My name is Andrea Livingston, and I am delighted to welcome you here today with our guest, Kate Noble. And we are just so grateful to have you along on this 6-month journey with us. And if it's your first time tuning in, we're meeting together every first and third Wednesday of the month at 4 p.m. And a quick announcement before we get started and dive into today's exciting topic is that we now have all of our recordings that we've been doing up online, and that's at noetic.org/nextgen, and we'll send out that email link to everyone. But just so you know, if you missed any of the previous recordings, you can go back and catch those. Great, so without further ado, we have Kate Noble here, and he is the Professor of Consciousness Studies in the School of Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math at the University of Washington Bothell. And she has been at UW faculty member since 1990. And while she's there, she created and now directs the minor of consciousness, which is the first of its kind in a public university. So it's just so exciting to hear what she's been creating, and there's a consciousness club there at the University of Washington Bothell where the students have been creating amazing things. So we're going to kind of dive in a little bit to Kate's process of making the Consciousness Studies program a reality and what they're studying and what that means to the students, and many other really exciting ways that they're taking this into the public university system. So, Kate, I'm so delighted that you are here with us today. So welcome, and take it away.
Thank you, Andrew. It's wonderful to be there here too. Although I have to warn all of your guests that I have never done this before, so they have to bear with me. I can, as I tell my students, I'm great about flying through the multiverse, but I'm not very good about technology. So, are we ready for me?
We are. Yep, go for it.
Okay. Well, hi, everybody. I wish I knew who you were, but I don't. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself. And then also, I've got a whole bunch of slides which will be available through IONS as well, just to give you more information about what I've been doing at the University of Washington and why I've been doing it. And then I think even more importantly, what students have to say about it. I am a clinical and counseling psychologist, and I actually went into graduate school in, oh my goodness, a long time ago now, 1976. The reason that I went into psychology graduate school was not because I was in love with psychology. In fact, as an undergrad, I had not only dropped out several times, but I was also a pre-law student and had never taken one psychology class in my life. And then shortly after I started law school, I had an anaphylactic reaction and wound up having 3 cardiac arrests and 3 very powerful near-death experiences in a 2-hour period of time. And that happened in October of 1975. That was right before Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, was published. And really, there was nobody at the time who was talking about near-death experiences. So when I came back from that experience, from the third of those experiences, when I was given a choice about whether I wanted to come back to life or not, I made the decision in large part because I wanted to do what I am now doing, which is teaching about consciousness. It's been a very difficult journey in many ways. Several months after coming back from that near-death experience, I dropped out of law school, obviously, and I went into psychology, not, again, because I felt that there was anything there for me, but I also felt it was the largest tent in which to ask these kinds of questions. And I was really fortunate that the chair of the department was willing to allow me to do that. And I guess I want to start by saying it's really important at this time when so many of us are pioneering this new discipline that we find allies. allies within the departments, allies among colleagues, allies at the university, because we're at a time of enormous paradigmatic change, and that kind of change is never easy to bring about. So I want to really encourage you to find allies wherever you are if this is something that you think is important for you to do. I began to teach consciousness in 2001 on the Seattle campus, where I was a faculty member for 20 some odd years. I was able to teach one course a year for the honors program, and I taught one course a year for 8 years until 2008. All that time I was trying to find an academic home in which to expand the program, because not surprisingly, students would finish their first 10 weeks of the consciousness class and they would want more, and I had no opportunity really to give them more. And finally I had a conversation with the person who was a provost at the time, and she said a statement that really shocked me, and that was literally, "There will never be consciousness on this campus." And when she said that, I knew that I had to find someplace else if I were really serious about creating a consciousness program. Fortunately, I think the multiverse intervened at that point. Although California has a long history of branch campuses, which are no longer called branch campuses, the University of Washington didn't. The main campus in Seattle was the only campus until about 20 years ago. And for a variety of reasons, 2 additional campuses were created. One up in Bothell, which is about 20 miles north of Seattle, and then another one down in Tacoma, which is about 20-30 miles south. I became friends with a professor of physics at the Bothell campus, who was also a Buddhist and a meditator. And when I told him that I had been unsuccessful in finding an academic home to create a consciousness program, he spontaneously asked if I would consider coming to Bothell and doing that. He had just been asked to create a new school of science, technology, engineering, and math, which hadn't existed at that point. And he said that he thought consciousness would help to expand the minds of both students and faculty members. Was I willing to come and do that? You know, I thought about it a lot and decided that I would go and do this, because it was the first time that a way opened for the possibility of creating a really integrated and transdisciplinary program in consciousness. And so in 2010, I transferred my faculty appointment to the Bothell campus and began to create what is now the minor in consciousness. The minor launched formally in fall of 2014. So we have been up and running now for 2 years. There have been probably about 300 students who have taken at least the first of the consciousness series. Probably about 50 students now who have finished the minor. And let me tell you a little bit about the minor and students' reactions to it. So I hope that I'm going to be able to do this. I think I'm going to have to exit my screen somehow. There we go, from the beginning. Okay, so the minor in consciousness at the University of Washington Bothell is transdisciplinary and integral. And what that means is that what I try and do is introduce students to the study of consciousness through many different lenses, including psychology, which is really depth psychology, neuroscience, quantum physics, and quantum biology, and contemplative practices. That makes it transdisciplinary. The integral nature really comes from, that's a phrase that was coined by Ken Wilber, and I really appreciate it, because I think it's important in consciousness to not simply be studying the scientific and scholarly literature, but it's also really important for students to meditate, to pay attention to their dreams, and to begin to develop flexibility and fluidity in exploring their own consciousness. And so for that reason, the minor as I say here, uses both objective and subjective methods to expand awareness, to teach students about the intersection of mind and matter, and ultimately to enhance both individual and collective well-being. For me, this minor comes out of my very profound near-death experience, where it became clear to me that we were at a tipping point in terms of the evolution of the human species, and that it's very important for us to grow and mature psychologically and spiritually at this point. I think that's a very hard thing to do without guiding people through that transition and giving them access to the over 100 years of research that shows us that we are much more than what scientific materialism has tried to hypnotize into believing ourselves to be. So that, in a nutshell, is the description of the minor. One question that comes up a lot is, why a minor rather than a major? And there were two reasons for that. First of all, consciousness is not yet a vocational path for students. If anybody wants to study and become a scientist or a scholar in the field, you really have to find a different field other than consciousness. So what I wanted to do was to create a way to teach students about consciousness without having to have them compromise their vocational plans. Consciousness is not yet recognized as a legitimate area of academic inquiry, which seems really silly to me, but nonetheless, that's where we are. So this way, students can major in psychology or business or nursing or physics or anything they choose to, and they can also add a minor, which will not only give them access to this phenomenal field called consciousness studies, but will also enhance whatever it is that they're studying in a more traditional context. And the second reason that I think a minor is really important is because it really brings together a lot of students from different disciplines. Nursing, biology, psychology, education, all these different disciplines come together, and students can really get a sense of how they can integrate consciousness into the ideas that they care about most, and into ways, into the kinds of things that they might want to do in their adult lives. So that's the reason why it's a minor rather than a major. There are 5 courses that I've created for the minor. The first one, The Farther Reaches of Human Nature, is my way of appreciating Abraham Maslow and his book of that title. It introduces students to the field of consciousness. It introduces them to the scientific studies of non-local mental phenomena, healing near-death experiences, the role of meditation. And this all becomes really critical because most students come into consciousness not having a clue about what consciousness means. They've fully absorbed the biases of scientific materialism, and many of them frankly come in thinking that everything that they are about to study is New Age woo-woo. And so by grounding this in the scientific literature, they very quickly come to realize that there are a lot of very powerful scholars and very powerful scientists who have put their careers on the line to introduce humans to the nature and scope of their own minds. So that's the first course. Then as students go deeper through Consciousness 2, we get much more into the study of neuroplasticity, and particularly the role of attention and intention, compassion, and belief in creating our minds and sculpting our bodies and really creating our individual and collective worlds. And we talk a lot about the emergence of a new paradigm of consciousness that is slowly but surely, I believe, supplanting scientific materialism. Another course that I teach is the Psychology and Science of Dreams. And the reason that I teach this is because, I tell my students it's very important to realize that every person has at least 5 periods of dreaming during an average night's sleep. But most people don't take their dreams seriously. They don't remember their dreams. They don't work with their dreams. And yet dreams are a phenomenal way of beginning to explore consciousness, particularly when one learns to become lucid. So in that course, we talk about the cross-cultural history of dreams, going back to ancient cultures. We talk about contemporary psychological theories of dreams, starting with Freud and Jung and moving up into Calvin Hall and some of the more contemporary researchers. We talk about different ways of incubating and interpreting dreams, and we spend quite a lot of time talking about lucid dreaming and what we are learning about the nature and scope of consciousness through lucid dreams. Then in Consciousness 424, that's consciousness in the natural world. And what we do there is explore animal and plant consciousness, both from scientific perspectives, primarily the work of Rupert Sheldrake, and the shamanic research about animal and plant consciousness. And we end that course studying the Dalai Lama's book, Ethics for a New Millennium, because I think it's really important for all humans right now to understand that we are not the top of the food chain, but that we have deep ethical responsibilities for collaborating with and interacting with other species, including the biosphere. A book that I use for that course is Jeremy Narby's The Cosmic Serpent, which I think is just a phenomenal way of introducing students to what Narby calls the mindedness of the natural world. And then finally, the last class that I teach is called Consciousness and Well-Being. And that's a way of focusing more deeply on non-local dynamics, looking at entanglement and attunement as really underlying principles of psychological and physical reality, and focusing on ways that students can not only continue to expand their minds, but also promote their own wellness, their own well-being, and find ways of integrating consciousness into the activities that they'll undertake as they move more deeply into their adult lives. So that, in a nutshell, are the courses that I teach. The goals of the minor are, as you can see, they're pretty extensive, I think. I definitely want students to be able to explore the complex relationships among mind, body, and brain. I want them to be able to do that with intellectual rigor and open minds, with what Rupert Sheldrake calls constructive skepticism rather than compulsive skepticism, and to always keep in mind what the Buddhists call beginner's mind. So that becomes sort of the context, the platform of everything that we do in all of the courses in the minor. I want students to become knowledgeable about the literature that constitutes the field. I want them to be able to talk not only with each other, but with contemporary scientists and contemplative scholars about the different theories of consciousness. I tell my students when they leave the minor, they probably know more than about 90% of practicing scientists and scholars in the field. And that's in part because there's so little information available in higher education because of the taboo that Dean Radin talks about quite eloquently, the taboo against consciousness. So another goal of the minor is to learn to meditate. I practice or teach students a very basic biobehavioral form of mindfulness meditation. I also let them know that there are many other forms of meditation that I hope that they will explore and practice. But I think it's really important in an integral program that they not only use their intellectual skills, but they really strengthen their ability to reflect, to be introspective, and to explore and take seriously the subjective content of their own minds. We know that meditation encourages people to become more compassionate and more insightful and more resilient. And I think through the minor, I hope that students will be encouraged to do just that. And finally, I think I want them to get a greater sense of meaning and purpose in their lives. You know, this is a very difficult time, as we all know. And a lot of my students feel extremely pessimistic, depressed, nihilistic, anxious, and I think it's in part because they've been told that there's no underlying underlying meaning or purpose in life. And you can't study consciousness seriously without realizing that pretty much everything we've been taught about reality is wrong. And as students explore consciousness more deeply, one of the wonderful things that happens, as I will show you in some research that we've done, is that all of a sudden they feel optimistic, they feel a sense of curiosity and hope. It's almost as though they feel like they are reawakened to a kind of excitement about life that they lost a long time ago. So those are all of the goals that I have in mind in creating and teaching the minor. Just in last June, 4 of my students, former students, and I finished and published a study which is called Why Consciousness? Teaching and Learning at the Leading Edge of Mind Science. And this was a study that we did over the course of 4 years, specifically to look at changes in beliefs about consciousness and reality, and the personal and intellectual effects of studying consciousness for students who completed the first quarter of the consciousness minor. So we collected data from 116 undergraduates who were enrolled in Consciousness 1, as we call it, during autumn quarter 2013, 2014, or 2015. And we did a couple of things. One was we gave students at the beginning, at the end of the course, a questionnaire developed by Imants Baruch at the University of Western Ontario called the Beliefs About Consciousness and Reality Questionnaire. And we wanted to see whether students' beliefs changed and how they changed over the course of 10 weeks. We also did grounded theory analysis of some final reflection essays that students wrote, and followed that up with an ethnographic real-time analysis of students' questions during the course. So we were trying to get as deep a sense as we could about what happens for students in the course of 10 weeks when they are being introduced, most for the first time in their lives, to a very different viewpoint of reality. And let me just quickly show you some of the results. I won't bore you to death with statistics, but we see in 2013, 2014, and 2015 that students' beliefs in all these different areas changed profoundly and significantly. I can refer you to the original study that Imants published, where he talks about what the questionnaire entails and what these different categories are. But let me show you this figure, because I think it's particularly interesting. This shows you the pre and post test results from the students' completion of the questionnaire. The anti-physicalism scale tells us whether we suggest whether or not we believe that physical reality is all there is, or whether we are more than just the physical beings that we inhabit. Religiosity talks about whether or not people believe in a personal God, whether they have a theological orientation or a spiritual orientation. That's interesting about religiosity, because it doesn't necessarily mean just the traditional religions. The meaning subscale looks at how whether or not people feel the need for a sense of meaning and purpose in their lives. Extraordinary experiences tell us whether or not individuals have had these kinds of experiences, whether they are, knowing who is on the phone before you look at caller ID, or whether you've had an anomalous healing experience. The extraordinary belief scale shows us whether or not people take these kinds of possibilities seriously or not. Inner growth speaks for itself. Do people feel that being introspective and reflective is important in terms of their overall development? And finally, the transcendentalism scale is a combined scale that measures changes across all of these different dimensions. And as you can see, students' beliefs changed powerfully and significantly for all three groups of students over the 3-year period of time. In that article, we go in much more depth into the ethnographic analysis too, to not only be able to see quantitatively how students' beliefs change, but also to look at what they say qualitatively, which I think in many ways is some of the more interesting information. We are also right now in the middle of starting a new study, which I'm calling Why Consciousness Matters. And what I'm looking at here is, what do students say after taking 2 or more courses in the consciousness program? Why does it matter to them? I know why consciousness matters to me. But I think what is much more important in training a new generation of scientists and scholars is to understand more clearly why consciousness matters to them. If it does, consciousness doesn't matter to most of my colleagues in the School of Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math at the University of Washington Bothell. In fact, they really wish it would go away because they don't think that consciousness matters at all. But students do. And so I want to understand from their perspective, what is it that they tell us that they have learned? How have they grown? How have they changed? Why is this study important to them? And I'm just in the process now of analyzing about 200 final reflection essays. But in preparation for this webinar, here are some of the categories of understanding that I've been able to discern. First of all, students tell us that as a result of studying consciousness, they feel a marked increase in well-being on both a personal and collective level. And they tell us all kinds of ways in which they feel healthier psychologically and emotionally as a result of learning this material. They tell us that they acquire some critically important tools for self-discovery, self-development, self-awareness. They gain a much deeper sense of meaning and purpose in life, in part because they discover that there's a whole lot more to mind and reality than what they've been led to believe, either by the scientific materialist dogma that they've grown up with, or for many of them also the more dogmatic religious beliefs that they've absorbed. They tell us that they have an increased respect and appreciation for the natural world and a much deeper awareness of humans' responsibilities to the biosphere. Perhaps most importantly of all, they feel this profound opening of their hearts and their minds. They feel hope, optimism, empathy, compassion. And for many of these students, they say this is the first time that they can remember feeling curious and excited about being alive. And they feel a sense of responsibility and a real determination to engage in the world in ways that they never considered before. They also tell us, and I hope we get a chance to talk about this more in our chat session, they also tell us that consciousness is not for the faint-hearted. They grow and they change in unexpected ways, and sometimes what they are learning scares them to death. Sometimes it's very frustrating. Sometimes they feel, or many times actually, they tell us that they feel more isolated because they leave class excited to talk with family or friends or colleagues or other professors, and they find that they run smack into a wall of materialist ideology, and then they go silent. So they'd say, they think that studying consciousness is one of the most important things that they've ever done, but they also say that it's not without its difficulties. And here's a quote that I found from one of my students who said, "My whole viewpoint on how I perceive the world around me has shifted more times than I can count. I've experienced so many paradigm shifts in my thinking that the more I know that I don't know anything at all." And that's both the good news and the bad news of studying consciousness from a transdisciplinary and integral perspective. Last couple of things I want to share with you are, first of all, to tell you about the Consciousness Club. A number of my students, in fact, 4 of whom were co-authors with me in the first article that I talked about, started what they call the Consciousness Club. And this is an officially sponsored University of Washington club. They meet regularly to bring different activities to campus, to expand their ideas about consciousness, to cross-fertilize each other, to engage in different experiences like going to sensory deprivation tanks or different meditation programs. The Consciousness Club began in 2012. Every year I wonder whether it will reconstitute itself because students graduate. New students have to come in and take the club over. And every year students have stepped up and done just that. So I think that having a Consciousness Club is a phenomenal way for students to engage each other and create a really critical community to expand their own minds and to keep the study of consciousness alive for them. And I guess that brings me to the end of, oh, can I get out of this? I don't know. Brings me to the end of my conversation about the minor in consciousness and why I do what I do. That's the politics. You know, we really do need a new generation of scientists and scholars to move this field forward. Most of us who have been in this field for a long time are getting older. We're retiring, we are leaving the field, some are reincarnating, and in order for this field to continue and to grow and develop even more, we need you. We need millennials. We need young people who take consciousness seriously, want to study it professionally, and embed these ideas in the professional work that they do. So I really want to encourage you to be part of that new generation that takes this forward. That, Andrea, I think I'm talked out.
All right, that was so wonderful. I really want to stop to honor you for the trailblazing work that you're doing in bringing this consciousness studies program into the school systems and public school universities. So I'm so inspired listening to you and hearing how it's affected the students. And it really struck me when you were saying some people, it's the first time they're feeling curious and excited about life.
That's really critical.
You know, that's so profound and truly transformative education. So I was really struck by that and just really want to honor what you're doing there at the university. Yeah,
it's really exciting to me. Can I read you something? I was just looking at one of the papers that one of my students wrote, and this is particularly powerful. This is a student who grew up in a situation of enormous and almost unbelievable abuse, sexual abuse, family abuse, blah, blah, blah. And she completely disowned religion, and immersed herself in science, and then became more and more depressed. Anyway, what she says was, at the end of this particular paper that she wrote at the end of the minor, was, I still don't know exactly what my career will be, but I know it will be in consciousness. I know that I will continue on to get my doctorate. I know that I want to engage with a small but growing community, and I want to be part of building that community. I want to get to that community as much as I take. I am so grateful for the opportunity to have learned all of this material, and I cannot wait to see where that work will lead. And then she goes on from there.
Wow.
Yeah, this is really transformative work. It's profoundly healing. Not only intellectually and psychologically engaging, but it is profoundly emotionally and spiritually healing.
Yeah, it touches me so deeply, as that's one of the main initiatives that we have with Next Gen, is to let people know that there is people out there studying, there is a tribe, and you were talking earlier about finding allies within this space. So this webinar is a chance for people to gather from anywhere in the world to come together and hear topics on this and begin to talk about it. So it just, it really touches my heart that this is happening so many places in the world, and it's happening there at the university. And and that the Consciousness Club that has started there has also inspired us to help people who are tuned into the work of IONS to start their own consciousness clubs on campus. So I know there's a lot of students, both in undergrad and doctorate, and there's postdoc people who've been on these webinars. So there's people of all scales who are in school or who are out of school and interested in learning how to take this into their career. So yeah, so great. Yeah, it's so great to have kind of this perspective of bringing that in. And at NextGen, we're really here to provide a hub for people to gather together and learn information and join this bigger community. So,
you know, Andrea, the work that you're doing is so important because, you know, when you look at this field and how it's developed, in 1882, when the Society for Psychic Research first formed in Britain and then in the United States, they began to gather the most profound minds of their generation to look serious, take consciousness seriously. And that research has developed and grown and become more robust over the years, but nobody hears about it. My students all say, why have we never heard this before?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
My concern now is that as people get older and as they leave this field, this may all go underground again, unless there are new millennials, new people who come and take it seriously and embed it in their work. So what you're doing, I think, is critically important.
Great, great. Well, I want to open up questions. We already have some questions coming in here, so I'm going to go ahead and open up questions. And if you are on the webinar and you haven't been with us before, you'll see on the right side of your screen, you'll see a control panel that has questions, and you can type your questions in to us, and we'll read them off. You can also ask live questions by raising your hand. There's a little symbol of a hand, and you can go press that, and it'll raise your hand, and then I can unmute you, and then you can talk directly with Kate for your questions. So go ahead and type them in, and I will start reading them off here. Okay, so we've got Nan says, I'm wondering if she's encouraging her students to become active in such existing organizations as the Parapsychological Association and so on. So.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I try and introduce students to all of the different organizations and associations so that they can not only participate but also see where, you know, sort of figure out where their tribe is, where their community is, where they want to go next. Absolutely.
Beautiful, beautiful. And then we've got a question here from Loli, and she's asking if there are opportunities to take some of the consciousness courses online, and or if you're planning on making an online course for the teachings that you do.
You know, I get that question a lot, and the answer is no. And there are two reasons for that. One is I think that consciousness really requires face-to-face contact to explore deeply. I find online education sort of very cold and off-putting, and I think for consciousness, particularly because, you know, look at what is consciousness doing? It's telling us that everything we've been taught about reality is wrong. Right? I mean, the bottom line is everything we've been taught about reality is wrong. Well, that's not an easy belief to entertain. And it brings with it, as you take this seriously, it raises all kinds of issues and anxieties and questions that I think really need that kind of face-to-face interaction in order to deal with. So, no, right now I'm not doing anything online, but you know, somebody in the future can do that.
Yeah, yeah. No, great points about the power of in-person, especially with these topics. So, yeah. Okay, so we have Majori says, let's see, such a great start to the webinar. Thank you so much. And is there a possibility to access a reference list from the courses you teach? She is doing a PhD in Australia in consciousness, but doesn't have access to this kind of courses. So maybe some of the books or some of the things that you teach.
know, I would be happy to share my syllabi.
Awesome.
With anybody who wants it. So maybe, Andrew, maybe what I can do is send you copies of all of the syllabi, and then you can distribute them.
I can definitely. Yep.
Because it had that, they also have all of the books that I use. I'll also send you a copy of the article that came out in June, the neuroquantology article, because that has a lot of references too that are not necessarily in the syllabi. So I will do that later today.
Beautiful, great. And she says, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." So,
I'll do a real shout out for a couple of books in particular, though. In Consciousness 4, Consciousness and Well-Being, I used Larry Dossey's book, which came out 2 years ago, One Mind, which is fabulous. I used Rupert Sheldrake's Dogs That Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home for Consciousness 3. I used Jeremy Narby's Cosmic Serpent for Consciousness 3. I use Alan Wallace's book, Embracing Mind, to help students understand the power of scientific materialism as a dogma and to understand that science is not scientific materialism. And in Consciousness 1, I use Elizabeth Lloyd Mayer's Extraordinary Knowing as the primary text, followed by Raymond Moody's Life After Life and some work by Pim Van Lommel. So I keep going back to those principal scholars because I think their work is so powerful and so accessible to students who are just coming to us for the first time. But that's all contained in the syllabi, which I will send you.
Great, yeah, and then we'll just send that. We'll probably just attach that under the video on the website for everyone listening. We can also send that in an email to everyone who's here. So thank you for sharing that. We've got a couple of questions, and I'm sending your book reference list, so that's definitely wanted and needed. Great. So let's see. Okay, so one question again is, how do you encourage adults who have completed their college degree to become more active in consciousness learning?
Oh, wow, that's a great question for which I do not have a great answer because it is very isolated. You know, I don't know what to say. I get that question all the time. We need community, but community is something that in this field people have to create. So I really don't know how to go about doing that if you're not connected to a meditation center. That might be a possibility, or IONS. I think that's where the online community maybe have the greatest impact, because I suspect that there are many people around the world very isolated who may not be part of a meditation community or a spiritual community that fosters this kind of conversation. And certainly they're not going to find it in higher education, in mainstream higher education yet. So it may be creating something like you're doing, Andrea, through IONS, may be the best way for not only students who are currently in school, but also people who have finished school to meet up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to add on that is that at our IONS website, we've got, if you go to community.noetic.org, and I can actually type that into the box and send it out to everyone. So community.noetic.org. I'm just sending that out to everyone now. You can look, and we have about 160 community groups all over the world, and it's these people who are looking for connection and wanting to explore consciousness, spirituality, science in a really open-minded way. So if that's one resource of finding community in your local area, so you can either join an existing community group or start one yourself, and we've got ways to help with that, because we also notice, there's a lot of people who've started a community group say, it's the first place I've gone where I can really talk to people about these ideas and have open-minded, many different perspectives in the same room, talking and chewing over these different scientific findings and spiritual practices, and it's really inspiring to people who feel like I'm the only one who's interested in this, so I definitely want to encourage everyone who's here. So the community groups is the older version of that, and then the consciousness clubs on campuses are basically the way to do that as student groups. And we did have someone ask, how do I start a consciousness club on my own? Let's see if I can find it. How do I start a consciousness club on my own campus? And I can give some input from my side from what we're trying to do here to help support that. And I would love first to hear kind of any advice or perspective you've gotten from listening to the students who started a consciousness club there University of Washington?
Well, you know, the students decided to organize, in part, the prime first input, I'm losing my ability to speak. The first impetus for the Consciousness Club came when we were trying to get the minor approved. You can imagine the backlash and the resistance. It was horrible.
Yeah.
There was resistance every single step of the way. Every time I went through a curriculum committee to get a new course approved, and then when I went through all of the rigmarole to propose the minor, wound up sitting on a vice chancellor's desk for a year. She wouldn't approve it, she wouldn't disapprove it, she wouldn't talk to me, she wouldn't respond to the students. I really thought that the minor was dead. And this was 2013. The students organized. They met with the student government. They created a consciousness club, so they became an official university-sponsored club. They had some, which meant that they had access to some funds.
Amazing.
Then they organized and met with the student government. So 50 of them crowded into a small room with the student government, and they insisted, since they were paying the tuition, they wanted the minor, and they insisted that the student government pass a resolution asking for the minor to be approved by the vice chancellor.
Wow, that's amazing.
Well, this is really cool. This would not have happened otherwise, and I think that the vice chancellor and her staff were so blown away by the fact that these students were organizing, and it's the first such organization since the 1960s and 70s, that the next day she signed the approval, and it went to the president of the university, who a couple of months later officially authorized it. So that was the start of the Consciousness Club. And you know, all you need are a couple of students, a couple of kindred spirits, to, you know, create a club, to create a space, and to invite people into that space. You can then invite speakers into that space or different activities. You know, I live at the Pacific Northwest, and we have a pretty powerful extended consciousness community up here. So the students have been able to bring to campus different groups and different projects that involve consciousness in one way or another. And they got the money from the university to do that because they're an officially sponsored club. So, you know, use your creativity, but it just takes a couple of people to start this. It doesn't take a village. You create the village, but it does take a few pioneers.
Yes, yes, and that's powerful to hear how the approval of the consciousness studies minor actually came, you know, fine, let's look at this from the students, because there's so much energy there. That's just such a powerful lesson also of the power that students have to say, we want this, and how can we work together with faculty to really make it happen. So that's
well, and you know, that I want to encourage students to do this, because there are faculty in hiding who take consciousness seriously, but they are terrified to come out. You know, I'm a tenured full professor, and that means that, as I tell my students, unless I get drunk and run over one of them in the parking lot, I can't be fired. Well, I don't drink, so you know, that's not going to happen. But the bottom line is I'm safe, I'm protected, and so I can take this risk. But there are a lot of faculty, young faculty who are not safe, they're not tenured, or they're not protected, and they can't. And so it really is important to have a supportive student for those people to come out and advocate for the creation of these kinds of programs.
Beautiful, beautiful. And we've got a question from Adam Blake, who says, why is this field so taboo at universities?
Oh, geez, what a great question. You know, I think it scares the hell out of people. I mean, look, it's a totally new paradigm. I've written a lot about this. I wrote a book, and I'm not plugging my book, believe me. But in 2001, I published a book called Riding the Wind Force, Spiritual Intelligence and the Growth of the Self. And part of what I was trying to figure out was, why is this taboo in place? You know, Dean Radin speaks to it very eloquently in his Google talk, and a lot of people talk about this. Larry Dossey speaks to this. I think that we have been hypnotized collectively for the last 400 years since the rise of science. I think that it was important that science arose when it did because the religious warfare that had swamped Western Europe for 1,000 years or so was terrifying people. And science really pulled humans back from that brink. But the problem is that it offered a methodology or a paradigm that completely focused on physical reality and completely ignored inner space, inner reality. And to the point where people forgot that there was such a thing as the mind that was independent of the body. And so, you know, that's my very short answer, but I've given a lot of thought to this over the years. I think we are tiptoeing away from that paradigm now, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Great, thank you. And we have, good, we still have some time for questions. We've got lots of questions coming in, so unfortunately I can't get to them all, but we'll try to see what questions we can answer. So we have a question from another Kate. So she says, hi Kate, if you were to start...
Great name.
If you were to start your career in consciousness studies from scratch from this day, what path would you take? Would you still go down the psychology route?
Yeah, I would. You know, I think a lot about this. In fact, I heard Charlie Tart talk about this recently in a talk that he was giving. I think psychology is probably still the biggest stint. You know, it's really important to be able to speak not only to inner space, but also to neuroscience, right? Because that's where a lot of very powerful research about non-locality and the power of intention of the mind is coming to the fore. So, you know, where can you do that? Well, I think if you're going to take consciousness seriously as a profession, you want to have the best, strongest credentials that you possibly can. And that means a PhD. You've got to have that. And psychology, neuroscience are probably the best places to start. Or maybe, I think they're probably the best avenues. I was going to say physics, but I'm not sure that that's really true. I think you should know, have a good grounding in quantum physics particularly, and quantum biology, but I'm not sure that that will be a good professional platform to launch consciousness from. Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and it's interesting to see just even over this series how different people entered in. So some from psychology, we have some from physics, we have some from biology. So it is kind of cool to see all the different ways people have really established their careers and then said, oh, there's something else here, and are able to take that and weave it into incorporating more consciousness in. So I love the...
I hope that 20 years from now, at minimal, at least, that there will be a field called consciousness, and it will be a transdisciplinary field, and you'll be able to major in it and do your doctoral work in it and enter in through all those different portals. We're not there yet.
Yes, that's where we're headed, where the arrow's pointed. Yes. Great. Yeah, so one person is asking if you ever do workshops outside of school, so at Esalen or other places.
Well, I haven't. I mean, you know, it's certainly something we could talk about. It would be great to organize something like that with IONS because, you know, you guys have a much more powerful platform than I do up in the upper left-hand corner of the map.
Yes, and I do want to say I'm excited. We're in process of planning our conference right now for everyone who's on the line. It's going to be in Oakland, California in July 2017. So the save the date is out now, but we're getting a lot of speakers and a lot of people. So it will be a whole weekend of immersing into this kind of thought and open-minded experience in spirituality and science. So I just wanted to bring that up as, you know, one more place of where can the tribe gather and learn this information and expand in it. So that's one place that
well, if you invite me, I will come down and do a workshop.
Great, great, great. Yes. And we're also doing a next gen track, so ones that students can come present their own work or theories and have much more participatory experiences. So it's just fresh off the press that we're having it in July in Oakland, so I wanted to mention that while we're here. Great. So we do have a couple more minutes. Let me just scan some questions. So we have there we go. We have Miranda, and she says she first asked for books, which we've got already, and then says, I wish I could move to Washington. She said, I'm wondering how nurses incorporate this into their career.
Oh.
I just finished my BSN and would love your syllabi. So just if you have anything about nurses, that would be great.
You know, I tried to encourage the School of Nursing to incorporate consciousness, and they are completely opposed. So that same taboo that we experience in psychology and in other disciplines is alive and well in nursing as well. So, you know, you can do this. You have to be a pioneer. You have to be gutsy. You have to be willing to use this. One of the great, I think, tools for nurses is therapeutic touch. You know, alternative and complementary medicine practices. Because I think that nursing particularly is not the schools necessarily, but the nurses themselves, because of the nature of their work, are much more open to those modalities.
Yeah, definitely. Beautiful. Beautiful. Great. So we have a question here from Brian. And Brian says, I have read so many, many books on consciousness, but I want to know now how to develop on my own consciousness, my own telepathy, clairvoyance, mediumship skills, out-of-body experiences, and is asking if you have any suggestions.
Well, meditate, meditate, meditate. Become a lucid dreamer. Right? Really, I would read Robert Wagner's book, Lucid Dreaming, Gateway to the Inner Self. I think that's a fabulous book. I use that in my dreams class. There is an International Academy of Consciousness, and it's based in Portugal and LA, I believe. Anyway, their mission is to teach people to do out-of-body experiences reliably, so that's a resource. The Monroe Institute is still functioning in, I think it's West Virginia, and they're doing a lot of work with different technologies in order to teach people how to do out-of-body experiences. I do think it's really important, if you're going to develop that part of yourself, to have a meditation discipline, to really be grounded in that, and also to make sure that you've cleaned out your psychological closets. Right? That's really important, because no matter where you go, you take yourself with you. And that means that you take all of the baggage as well as all of the good stuff. Only the baggage can become much more frightening if you don't know that it's there.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, great advice. Good. Well, we do have more questions, but I'm looking at our time, and it looks like we're coming to the end of the time. But this was just such a rich exploration with you, and I can see just by all the questions coming in of the excitement, both that this is happening at the universities and how people can get involved. And I have many messages saying, thank you, I enjoyed the webinar many times. So I just wanted to pass that on to you from everyone who's here on the line. So please, everyone who is on here, join us the first and third Wednesdays of every month all the way through December. We'll be joining together at 4 p.m. Pacific time to dive into different aspects of consciousness studies and what that means as the next generation coming up in this age and this time, and how do we actually incorporate it into our lives, into our careers, and knowing that there's a whole bunch of other allies and people who are also interested in this, both on the internet as well as hopefully we can help facilitate connecting you to other people locally through consciousness clubs or community groups. So we're always here to ask questions and to help with the Next Gen initiative. You can email us at nextgen@noetic, which is noetic.org, and this will all be sent out in an email as well. So deep gratitude to you. Thank you so much, Kate, for being with us.
Live long and prosper, as they said on Star Trek, right?
Yes.
Won't we go where no one has gone before, my friends?
Yes, yes. Beautiful. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye.